Hi, I'm Michelle Atkinson. I'm the Environmental Horticulture Agent here in Manatee County. And today I'm here to present some information about our Florida water, which water in Florida is our lifeblood. So first we're going to talk about water quantity. So this presentation will be talking about water quantity. There's a second presentation on water quality and then one on the Florida Water Star program. So let's talk about water on Earth. On the entire planet, only 3% of the water available, water out there, is fresh water. Only 3% of all the water on Earth is fresh water. Of that fresh water, that 3%, much of it is tied up in ice caps and glaciers for now, right? We hear all the time about the melting, but for now, the largest part of it is tied up, it's frozen in ice caps and glaciers. 30% of that is groundwater. So when we look at like the groundwater and the surface water, together it's about 31% that's available to us. In that surface water, 87% is in lakes, 11 in swamps, and 2 in rivers. So when we talk about where we get our drinking water from, there's a lot of water that we see. The whole planet looks blue, right? But there's just not a lot of freshwater resources for us to pull drinking water from. So we have to really be careful and conservative. So let's talk a little bit about this, the cycle that water goes through here on Earth. And first, we have water, let's say, on the Earth's surface. And how does it go up? Well, it evaporates. We have evapotranspiration. It either evaporates out of the ponds, out of the rivers and the oceans, or it can transpire from plant material. So the plants can actually let off the water as well. And so it goes up and it forms clouds up in the sky, of course, which then comes back down as rain, precipitation. And when we have rain, we have runoff going back into those ponds, rivers, oceans, lakes. But hopefully we also have some area of land that is open and available that when the water hits it, it can actually move and percolate the water down through the soils and recharge our aquifers down below. So, the water just makes a circle around, and as it circles, as it goes through our soils, hopefully it's getting a little cleaning process going, through the tree roots and all. It can help to clean our water that way. So we do have a lot of freshwater resources in Florida, and I do love our freshwater resources. We are really unique. A lot of people come here, move here, vacation here because of all of these great resources. Not just freshwater resources, we also have a great saltwater resources too. If you're a fisherman, you know that. But we have these wonderful springs that stay at 72 degrees, I believe it is, all year round. And so it's wonderful in the hot summer to get in and cool off in our springs. And I would invite you, if you've never been to one, to take advantage of them. They are unique. We also have a lot of wetlands, of course, lakes and streams and rivers, and then we have our aquifer. So let's watch this brief video.
$150 billion gallons. That's nearly enough to fill 250,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. On average, That's how much rain falls daily on the state of Florida. Rain recharges the aquifer, Florida's underground rivers, and gives rise to the largest concentration of freshwater springs on the planet. Places like Wakulla Spring, with freeway-sized underground tunnels and caves, to Blue Springs, which feeds the St. Johns River and provides wintertime refuge to manatees. Rain saturates Florida's swamps and sloughs, supplies its streams and rivers, the north-flowing 300-mile-long St. Johns, the Kissimmee, much of it happily meandering again, the Apalachicola, which primes a bay that is a literal seafood buffet, and the planet's only sawgrass river, the Everglades.
While you look down and see the river and wonder what's feeding that river, it's primarily rain.
Rainwater flows across Florida's mostly flat landscape, into the ground and out of our springs, feeding the flows of the powerful Swanee and the crystal clear Ichetucknee, rivers that are poetry in motion, places that have inspired explorers to search for a fountain of youth and have sustained people for more than 10,000 years. Rain and groundwater fill our lakes. The Grand Okeechobee, the most prominent Florida feature viewed from space, and smaller lakes with names like Minnehaha that dot the central Florida landscape. Water is Florida's lifeblood. It powers our economic engine and defines life for all its inhabitants, human and animal.
We're very fortunate in Florida to have some 700 freshwater springs, over 50,000 miles of rivers and streams, and 1,350 miles of coastline that really shape Florida's water footprint. No matter where you live in the state of Florida, there's a water body that truly defines your community.
But Florida's water footprint used to be much bigger than it is today.
If you look back in history, the way Florida was settled, the state was mostly underwater in South Florida. People came into the state, mosquitoes were terrible, floods were terrible, hurricanes were terrible, and they had one focus, and that was get the water off the land. So they built a very complicated series of canals. That's an example where we were driven to do that by safety concerns for the people who lived there. We weren't really thinking at the time about water quality.
From the Everglades to the Panhandle, man reigned over the rain-fed rivers, wetlands, and lakes for the better part of a century. Engineers drained swamps and straightened rivers, turning watery ecosystems into pastures and farms and communities. These early and well-intentioned feats of flood control engineering and land development were not without consequences.
The state has grown dramatically since then. Unfortunately, our development practices haven't really kept pace with that. And we've only now in the last 10 or 15 years begun to realize that by running all that water off the surface of Florida, not only are you potentially creating water quality problems for the receiving water, but you're running out a whole lot of fresh water that could and should be used for water supply.
An expanding population and periods of drought have stressed the aquifer, the state's groundwater supply.
90% of Floridians rely on groundwater for their potable water and drinking water. What we've recognized, though, if we overuse the groundwater systems, that those groundwaters are directly tied to the rivers, the springs, the wetlands in the state of Florida. And we need to be very cautious on overutilizing the groundwater systems in our state of Florida because of their effect on the natural system.
In addition to diminished groundwater supplies, many of Florida's rivers and lakes are plagued with stormwater runoff and other pollutants. Pollutants that range from fertilizers used on our farms and lawns to pet wastes and bacteria from faulty septic systems are washed by the rain into our rivers and lakes. As a result, many of the state's rivers and lakes are considered too impaired for fishing or swimming. Restoring the health of impaired rivers challenges government at all levels.
Certainly DEP is doing a lot to address these issues, and not just DEP, but we're working with the water management districts. And there's a lot of local governments that have taken huge steps in this direction. They're taking it on themselves at the local level, which is really what you want to happen. You want local buy-in, and state government is never going to be able to do this all.
Today, Florida's Department of Environmental Protection oversees one of the most extensive watershed restoration programs in the world. In every corner of the state, DEP is working with communities to permit and fund new stormwater systems, wastewater treatment plants to recycle and reuse water, and comprehensive long-range plans to restore the health of rivers, lakes, and streams.
The issue is really government can't do it all. It's a very personal responsibility to protect the environment. I can't stress how important it is to bring up a generation of children who understand the water cycle, who understand their place in the world. We like to say water is water. Drinking water, groundwater, wastewater, it's a giant cycle. And if you don't clean it up before it gets into the groundwater, the surface water, you end up cleaning it up after, which is a lot more expensive.
Cleaning up water and protecting watersheds throughout the state is a responsibility and cost shared by everyone. The farmer putting food on our tables, the sport fisherman vying for the trophy bass, those in search of relief from the heat, explorers who probe Florida's aquatic wilderness, homeowners and gardeners, builders and developers and industry, and, well, the list flows on. In short, everyone plays a part in watershed protection, whether it's protection of the pond down the road or the spring or river 20 miles away.
When you recognize as a part of the community the connectivity that you have with the river, you then recognize the fact that you can make changes in your habits to help improve the quality of the river. And that's something that we all need to accept, that we are connected to the waters in the state of Florida, no matter where you live. And the fact that we can take actions to keep those waters in a pristine state, I think are important to all Floridians.
So in Florida, we have about 5 different aquifer systems. There's the sand and gravel aquifer. There's the Biscayne aquifer. There's superficial aquifer. And so different parts of the state kind of tap into different aquifer systems. The Floridian aquifer is by far the largest. It is a huge, underlying aquifer. It is the thickest in the center part of the state, and it's like an underground river as it flows through the state, but it does thin out as it gets closer to the bottom of the state and we get closer to the Everglades and all. So rainfall in Florida, this is what's going to recharge those aquifers and fill up our ponds and lakes, get the rivers flowing. Our annual rainfall is around, it just depends on the resource that you're quoting, but anywhere from 50 to 54 inches a year. And it depends on where in the state you're at too. So I'm right here in Manatee County, which is this color right here. It's saying 52 to 56 inches of rain a year. We have a mobile irrigation lab here, and the interesting thing is we go out and tell folks how much irrigation water they should apply to their landscape, and we typically tell them 1 inch. So if it rains 52 inches a year, there's 52 weeks in a year. Wouldn't you think that we would have enough rain to sustain your landscape without additional water, that supplemental water called irrigation, our irrigation system? So no, unfortunately, when we get rain, we typically get it in a big bunch. It can be up, 6 inches of rain, hopefully not, but we can get a lot of rain all at one time, and then we can go for months without any rain. And that's where some landscapes need that supplemental irrigation during that time of drought. So about 36 inches either evaporates or runs off. And that leaves only 13 inches to recharge that aquifer. So it has to penetrate through the ground to percolate down into the aquifer. And as Florida gets developed, that's becoming more of a challenge. Florida does have this very cool karst topography. It's like Swiss cheese. It looks like hard rock, but if you were to, hit it too hard, it kind of crumbles. First, we typically have layers of soil that the water perks through, sand often, and then it gets a little more compact as it gets down, and then it gets into this limestone. This limestone is what is the structure down in the aquifers, and so the water can move through it. The problem is where there is some exposed limestone. When we have rain or when rainwater comes into contact with that limestone, it deteriorates it because the limestone's a base and the rainwater has a little bit of acidic value to it. And so it will erode the limestone. And that's what can cause sinkholes, is that erosion of the limestone. All right, we have another video for you.
Do you know where your drinking water comes from? You might be surprised to learn that over 7 billion gallons of fresh water erupts daily from an underground system that lies beneath homes, farms, cities, and highways. This amazing natural resource is unique to Central and North Florida. No other place in the world enjoys the quantity or quality of water that flows forth naturally from our groundwater system. Our crystalline water has lured millions of people to enjoy its beauty. It is hard to believe that this resource could be in danger. What makes the Springs region of Florida so important and vulnerable is its karst topography. Karst is a landscape dotted with sinkholes, fractures, and cracks through which water passes easily. Hidden from our view lies a network of underground rivers, water-filled caverns, and caves. These features and the water within them are known as the Floridian Aquifer. They are equivalent to surface rivers, lakes, and streams. Florida's underground waterways are just as vulnerable as surface waters. Springs reflect the health of our natural environment. They are not just for recreation, but are a key indicator of the water quality beneath our homes. The water gushing out of our springs comes directly from your local aquifer. It's your drinking water. Overuse of water and pollution along the pathways delivering water to the springs can leave a lasting legacy. It can take as long as 15 years for water to pass through the ground and return to us in the form of a spring. In other cases, water may travel as quickly as a mile per day. In order to protect and manage this vital resource, local governments know that their land use decisions will have lasting effects on our springs. The land areas that provide water to our springs are known as spring sheds. These are areas that replenish the aquifer and deliver water to your springs. Even though the water is out of sight, it is not out of harm's way. As it travels beneath our homes, businesses, farms, and highways, it is affected by virtually every aspect of our daily lives. This moving water is the supply that we depend on for our drinking water. The very nature of the absorbent terrain leaves it vulnerable to the introduction of contaminants. Water can carry contaminants such as fertilizers, pesticides, and other chemicals. Septic and storage tanks can leak directly into the groundwater and drain towards springs. Any contaminants carried through the ground can pollute our aquifer, the source of 90% of Florida's drinking water. Spring sheds are extremely vulnerable areas. Any land use or development within these areas directly affects our drinking water. We are all part of the problem, yet we can all be part of the solution in protecting vulnerable areas. Sources of trouble include many different land uses, but carefully planned, most types of land use have their proper places. To safeguard our drinking water resource and our springs, we must understand that protection and management happens at the community level. Land use and zoning decisions are made by local governments. Many people think that Water management districts, state or federal agencies have complete authority to protect local water resources. The reality is that the only decisions about responsible land use lie in your hands and the hands of your local elected officials. No one wants to contaminate the water we are drinking, but poor about responsible land use lie in your hands and the hands of your local elected officials. No one wants to contaminate the water we are drinking, but poor land use decisions based on lack of good information can cause this to happen. Negative effects from decisions that we made 15 or 20 years ago are being revealed now. Some wells are running dry and bacteria counts are startling. Even though spring water may look clear, it is not necessarily clean. Pollutants such as nitrates are invisible and are rising at an alarming rate within many of our springs, in some places exceeding the safe drinking limits. This polluted water has a major impact on our ecosystems, affecting businesses, recreation, and our economy. Yet armed with the most current information on how to prevent pollution, we can reverse this alarming trend. We are at a critical turning point in Florida's history. This is the last chance we have to ensure that our children can share the enjoyment and prosperity that the good water brings to Floridians. We will be judged as a civilization by our ability to look after our precious water resources. We have a chance to protect the primeval beauty that makes Florida a blessed and beautiful place. Help us protect our springs. By doing so, you will be preserving our way of life.
So as the video says, you can take part and be an activist in your area to help us protect some of these wonderful resources that we have. So this is a map of the springs, some of the springs, well, yeah, some of the springs, because there's the little teeny tiny ones that aren't marked on here, but this is a map of some of our springs in Florida, and you can see that the big blue dots are what we consider our first magnitude springs. They flow the most water out of them, and look at how many we have all over the state. These are wonderful resources for us. There also are as far or as close to us from Manatee County as Hillsborough. We have some springs that we can go and recreate in, and so you know, just really unique areas. I would highly encourage you to visit if you haven't, so that you will want to protect them as well. Okay, looking at Florida, in 1955, our billions of gallons per day use of fresh water and surface water was 2.2 billion gallons. And you know, speed along, go into the future. In 2012, we were using 6.4 billion gallons. But look at the population difference. The population increased from 3.9 million to 19.4 million. That's a huge increase in population, but not that big of an increase in water use. So, you know, we think, oh, well, we're good. But the issue, one of the issues that we are noting is that during this time, we've been coming up with very efficient features. So we have efficient faucets, you know, water conserving faucets and toilets and shower heads and dishwashers and washers. Also, our irrigation systems have become more efficient with micro irrigation. So we've learned to conserve, and we've gotten, you know, we've used technology to help us to conserve as well. Our population is still growing, and it's growing at rapid rates. However, you know, we are not growing these water conservation technologies. It's kind of like they're not tapped out fully, but you know, we've conserved a lot, and we're not sure that we can do a whole lot more to conserve indoors. We can outdoors. We can choose plants that don't require as much irrigation. So that could be one choice, but it is interesting to look at how fast the population has grown, but yet the water use did not grow as fast. But we don't anticipate that to be, you know, the next 60 years. We know that we've already kind of exhausted a lot of those water saving technologies. Hope that there's a lot more out there that's on a bigger scale, but for the house and around the house, you know, we've worked hard. Now, when it comes to some of the other uses of our fresh groundwater, like for agriculture, we're still working with ag and trying to get them to use more conservative efforts of irrigating crops, and in industrial as well. All right, so this is a map showing us the withdrawals. Well, first it's mapping out the districts. So this is our Northwest Florida Water Management District, the Suwannee, St. John's, Southwest Florida, and then the South Florida, which is the largest and deals with the large, you know, some of the largest populations through here. And this chart is showing us the withdrawals by water management district. So we are the green district, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and these are our withdrawals. So a little bit of fresh surface water, more surface groundwater, and look at how much salt water, saline surface water we withdraw. And I'll show you why in a little bit. Southwest Florida also is using some salt water, some desalination, we call it, you know, taking the salt out and making it fresh water essentially. Some of the other water management districts have some at small rates. So if you look at the total, we're using mostly so in 2012, our overall water withdrawn was 14 million gallons per day. You can see the breakdown as to how much was saltwater, freshwater ground, and freshwater surface. So again, surface water, Manatee County utilizes surface water for drinking water. We have Lake Manatee that we pull our water from and, you know, filter it and send it through the pipe. City of Bradenton also has the Evers Reservoir, which same thing. So a lot of towns do use surface water. Groundwater, of course, is pulling from a well. So if you look at who's using all of this water, we can see that public supply is a huge piece of the pie, and agriculture is also a huge piece of the pie. Agriculture, again, with best management practices of late, this is 2012 information. So in the past probably 5 years, there's been big efforts among our water management district, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, to help incentivize agriculture producers to conserve water by helping them financially with some, you know, overhead irrigation versus the flood type of irrigation systems. So when we look at our groundwater versus our surface water, most of the water that's being used is groundwater. So we're pulling it out of the aquifer instead of capturing, you know, the surface water or the runoff water. And so governments are looking at ways to change that, because this is where we can get into some water wars, right? So the aquifer is an underground river, but if upstream they're pulling out large amounts of water or diverting, water, then it doesn't get down into the aquifer, or it doesn't get down into our part of the state. So the aquifer doesn't have as much water in it. Wells don't work properly. They have to be dug deeper. We start having issues with sinkholes when we don't have our aquifer levels where they need to be. Surface water can have some of the same issues if your area is coming through, multiple counties or multiple states. Upstream, they could decide to divert the water and put it into a reservoir of some kind, and they get the water first before it comes on downstream. And so water wars have erupted, and will probably continue to erupt. I've just got to move my video here. There we go. Okay, so when we're looking at these withdrawals, who's using what? So our groundwater coming from the wells, again, largely large piece of the pie is public use. And then we have ag. Okay, but then when we look at the surface water, it changes. Ag is, really trying to look for ways to utilize surface water for irrigation of their crops. Mostly because it's expensive to get it from these public supplies, or getting the permits and all in place for the consumptive use permits that are required to do those kind of withdrawals. So it is interesting how it kind of lays out, but the public is still pretty dependent on groundwater. So when we look at what's going to happen in the future, all we can do is make predictions, right? Because none of us have our crystal balls, but our population is going to continue to rise. So what are we going to do with the water? Water use is going to continue to go up. So how can we help with that situation? What can we do? We ourselves can, of course, try to be as conservative as we can, but we also need to be cheerleaders of our conservation efforts within our neighborhoods, our communities. We need to stay in tune with what's going on with regulations and development, and use our voices. So again, the projected water demand is going up in the public water supply area. Again, population rising, continue to develop. So the demand is going to continue to rise. So what are we going to do to meet that demand? How are we going to get there? That's always an interesting question. So what happens when we are overusing our fresh water? Okay, so this is fresh water that's underground. I know it's a little wonky looking at this graphic. So here's the top of our land where it goes out into, let's say here would be the Gulf of Mexico. So here's our beach, Gulf of Mexico. All of these soils are saturated with salt water, right? When we have adequate rain amounts, and the water is able to penetrate and percolate down into the soils, then that fresh water comes in and pushes that salt water, kind of pushes it out. The opposite happens, however, when we withdraw too much fresh water, or we don't allow enough water to get, to recharge the aquifer. So if we have too much development, hard surfaces, and there's no open spaces for that water to perk down, and then we're still withdrawing it quite heavily, that fresh water is going to fade back, and that salt water is going to push forward. So what happens if you have a well right here? Okay, so you have a well for your irrigation at home, and it's in fresh water, but this fresh water, gets pumped out because, you know, we've got so much new growth, everybody's pulling it. Just there's not a lot of recharge taking place. So then the salt water starts to come in, and before you know it, you have what's called saltwater intrusion in your well. And once you have saltwater intrusion, you always have saltwater intrusion. So unfortunately, the rates of consumption exceed the replenishment in parts of South Florida and East Florida. Population is very high there. There's lots of hard surfaces. So it's a real problem there. Tampa Bay area, of course, we've had water wars. Saltwater intrusion is always happening from the process that I was just describing. We have, you know, lakes will dry up, sinkholes will form, and it just damages our environment and aquatic life. So in the state of Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection has deemed some areas as water resource caution areas. And these are areas that are have and are anticipated to have supply problems, you know, these critical water supply problems. So it's highly, highly, highly encouraged that reuse water, reclaimed water is utilized in these areas. So for new development in our county, you have to use the lowest quality of water available to you for your irrigation. So if there is a reclaimed water line running near the development, then that developer has to tie into that line and provide reclaimed water for his development. In some areas of Florida, that's in Manatee County, and some areas I know in the St. John's Water Management District, there was a time, and I'm not positive that this is still accurate, but there was a time that all development had to use reclaimed water, and they had to pay to put the infrastructure in to run the you know, pipes to them. So if they were far away from a reclaimed pipe, they had to pay to get that pipe to come to them. So of course, reclaimed water is in purple pipes, the nice purple pipes. So when you see that purple, you know that you're not to drink that water. Well, I think all reclaimed water in Florida that comes from a reclamation plant, they put a sterilant in it. So there is a sanitation process that, a sanitizer in it. So it, the bacteria and all don't live. They're concerned about, you know, playgrounds, kids' toys outside, and then the kids coming outside and drinking that water. So a sterilizer is put in it. I was going to say something else about this. Of course, reclaimed water can contain nitrogen and phosphorus, and that can be a real problem. So if you have reclaimed water, then watch your fertilization. You might be able to cut it in half or even less, or, you know, you may be able to not fertilize at all because of the amount of nutrient coming from the pipe. If you have micro irrigation, you need to be very careful with your reclaimed water because it can have some particulate in it, you know, algae or whatever. So just be careful as it comes through the pipe that you have good inline filtration. The other thing I was going to say is there's two things that are called reclaimed water. So there's reclaimed water from a reclamation plant, and then there's surface water reclaimed water. And sometimes that's just called surface water. So in communities, sometimes they'll use their stormwater pond and they'll put a pipe out there to pull irrigation out of that stormwater pond. So that's surface water reclaim versus reclaimed water from a reclamation plant. So it would be good for you to know where your irrigation water is coming from if it is reclaimed, because from the reclamation plant, it may have more of the nitrogen and phosphorus versus the stormwater pond situation. It could still have, you know, very high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in the stormwater pond. And so it's always a good idea to, you know, just have it checked out if you're having issues in your landscape. So some ways that we are going to look at dealing with this supply issue, demand issue, you know, more people than water. One of the ways is to, you know, build these types of reservoirs. So Tampa Bay Water built a 15 billion gallon reservoir as a backup, so that they can store water there and use it in times of you know, need when we're not getting rain, things are not getting recharged, and people draw more water for irrigation. Then this is a way that they can help to deal with that. They also have the saltwater desalination plant that Tampa Bay Water utilizes, which is why the Southwest Florida Water Management District's level was so high for the salt water. The desalination plant I toured probably 10 years ago, and they told us then that the plant was built and was only supposed to operate at a third capacity. And it's been operating at 100% capacity due to demand. It's very expensive to desalinate water. It's, you know, it's 3 times, 4 times the cost of other water sources. And so they actually mix the desal water in with other water sources, so that they don't have to, you know, charge. Well, they're still going to have to charge, but they mix it in with other water sources, so that it's not just one area getting all the desal water. So anyway, that was an interesting tour. There is a byproduct, of course, salt that comes out of that process, and they were looking for avenues of how to get rid of that salt. They weren't sure what they were going to do with it. They were just stacking it up and looking for outlets. So I'm not sure if they found any uses for that brine yet or not. So another way that we're hoping that we can help deal with this supply and demand problem of water is conservation. That's one of the cheapest ways that we can deal with it. If everybody has to start building desal plants to get water, your taxes, your water rates are going to go up significantly. So it is in all of our best interests to be conservative. And Bill Kerr said it best: we don't have a water supply problem, we have a water cost problem. Our water is very inexpensive, and a lot of people don't see the value in being conservative because it doesn't take a lot out of their pocket. So they're, you know, just pay that bill every month and don't worry too much about how much they're using. If water were as expensive as gasoline, then we would change our mind on that for sure. Oops, what happened here? So our current, well, this isn't current now, it's about 10 years old, use of water is here, and our projected is here. And I'm sorry that this got cut off. Let me see real quick. I'll tell you what the colors are. So, oh, maybe I can't. Nope, I'm gonna have to stop and fix this. So let's look at some ways that we can do our part to conserve water. So outdoor is addressed a lot because it's 50% of the public water supply is actually used to irrigate landscapes. That's kind of a statewide average. It's a little less in our area because our water management district has done a great job in funding, supporting education on this topic, but it's still a lot of water that's being used out in the landscape. And this is drinking water. So it's a lot of energy that's used to filter this water and then pipe it out to the homes for them to put it out into the landscape. So please, please look for alternate sources of water to irrigate your plants. and look for ways to save water out there. Micro irrigation, using the right plant for the right place. An irrigation system that has a leak can waste a lot of water. There's a statistic here listed, but it can waste a lot of water. So you should, when you're running your irrigation system the most, which is typically in the growing seasons, be checking that irrigation system to make sure that you don't have leaks or geysers, spraying water up because the head or the nozzle is missing. If you water by hand, you need to be very careful that you don't leave your, watering by hand, you'd have to stand there and hold it. But if you water with a sprinkler head on the end of a hose, you set a timer so that you don't leave it on overnight or for hours at a time. You can purchase controller timers to actually go on your spigot that when you turn it on, you can set it to run for a certain amount of time and it will shut it off. So that can save a lot of water, because if you leave an unattended garden hose out there, it can pour 8 to 12 gallons a minute. So that's a lot of water. So please make sure that you're not wasting it out there. And indoor, lots of ways to save inside. You can use the conserving toilets. There's the different ranges. There's the super conserving and then the ultra conserving, but high efficiency toilets. Definitely do that. Manatee County has a rebate in place that if you have the older high flowing kind of toilet, they'll give you a rebate for replacing that toilet. Stop leaks. If your toilet's leaking, you hear it run when nobody's flushed it, then you have a problem and it's wasting water. Same with your faucets. You'll need to, make sure that your faucets are in good repair and not leaking. They can definitely waste a lot of water, just a little drip coming out all the time. Look for those Energy Star and Water Star appliances. They will report out how much water that they use. So look for those type of appliances and install aerators and low flow shower heads and faucets. There's a website called the 40gallonchallenge.org, and if you go there, it will help educate you as to how much water you can save in your own home, indoors and outdoors. And you can take a pledge to try to conserve some of the water. I went to ours. Manatee County didn't have anybody pledged, so I did a pledge. So I would encourage and challenge you to go take the pledge. All right, so with that, that ends our first section, which we've talked about water quantity, and the next presentation will address water quality. Thank you. If you have any questions, my contact information is in the resource area of the module.